Hello and welcome to the weekly MG EVs podcast streaming live on Monday, the 8th of March 2021. We're here to talk about the MG ZS EV and the MG5 electric cars, hoping to inform and entertain you for about an hour or so. I'm Sean Cullen, username Sean Cullen on the forum, and joining me in this episode are MG EV owners, Michael Fisher from South Wales.
Hello, my username is Fisher2B on the forum.
David Stewart from Inverness.
Hi, Dave S on the forum.
Stuart Whitman from Southampton.
Hi, it's Stuart 46 on the forum.
And from North Yorkshire, Innovations Development Manager at Chorley Group, Miles Roberts.
Miles per kilowatt hour on the forum.
Thanks, guys. If you're watching live, thank you for joining us, and please click the like button and say hello in the chat window. If you're watching later, thank you for choosing to open this video, and please subscribe to get a notification before we go live next time. Tonight, we're talking about range, and we're going to be talking about what research prospective owners should do to have accurate range expectations. We'll look at the differences between WLTP, EPA and NEDC estimated ranges and real world ranges. We'll look at how range varies according to things such as external temperature, changes in driving styles and altitudes along the route and those sorts of things, and also how you can hopefully maximize efficiency. We'll touch on slipstreaming and any other related points. Can I just remind everyone that we've introduced a premium membership for just £3 per month. It gives you the premium member badge, the ability to upload a profile banner, the ability to select the MG Red theme, and the pleasure of knowing that you're supporting the website and this podcast. So in that vein, can we thank these premium members for supporting us? Alan 26, Jake, Mr. C, Ross N, Scorpion, Simon D, Tango 130, Tom McConnell, and Tony CH. And also, don't forget that we're running a fun competition to see who can get the best efficiency in their MG ZS EV or their MG5 EV in March. The rules are you need to reset your trip and take a photo showing your display. Then in March, you need to drive at least 200 miles, if that's possible, driving as efficiently as possible. Before the end of March, take another photo of your trip showing the efficiency and the miles traveled, at least 200, and post both photos in a reply in the competition thread. The link is in the description below. The person with the best miles per kilowatt hour score wins a prize, and that prize is a as new set of car shades, B-pillar back window shades for the ZS EV, very kindly donated by Miles. And although the prize fits a ZS EV, MG5 owners are welcome to enter, and if they win, they have the option of selling the shades here if they want to. So happy and efficient driving, folks. So let's go to looking at range then and seeing what experience we've all had with this, because it's probably one of the biggest questions that maybe, apart from BMS updates, that comes up regarding ZS EVs and MG5. So what's from the beginning, before you bought or took delivery of your electric vehicles, what research had you done to try and get an idea of accurate range expectations? So I'll pick the first person on my screen, if that's all right, and it's Dave, who's nodding at me, Dave Stewart. So what sort of research did you do at the start of your ownership, and how's it come to fruition?
Yeah, well, even a step before that, when I was thinking about would I get an electric vehicle, I actually checked what mileage I was driving in my car anyway. And it worked out that it was only about once every 4 to 6 weeks I was doing a 200 mile plus journey. So that gave me a lot of comfort, thinking, right, okay, I'll be able to use this a lot more than I thought I would. I was a bit naive.
Oh, you've gone quiet, Dave. Is he back? Okay, I'll go to Stuart Whitman just whilst we try and see if we can get Dave back on sound. Is that all right, Stuart?
Picking up where Dave left off, I was also naive.
I think that makes the three of us.
I think looking back to the original video that I saw advertising the MG5, and all I heard was 214 miles. So to me, my longest work journey, and I work kind of pretty much across the south of England, and I can be at any destination, was probably around about 100 miles away would be the furthest I'd travel. So obviously not doing any research. I did the maths, and 214, that leaves me 14 miles left when I get home. Picking the car up in December at the end of being -1 to -3 degrees for about a week, I quickly realized that the range was about 50 miles before you start having to think about charges. So I must admit, just no research and sharp learning curve, but get it now. I just understand it now, and I'm totally cool with it. Naive.
Yeah, join the club. Dave, are you back? Just checking.
I've taken the headset off. You pick him up okay?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. So I just as you were saying there, and before I went quiet, I'm thinking, great, every journey is going to be 180. Everything's tickety. My first journey, as I think I've said in previous podcasts, was from South Shields to Inverness. And I remember saying to the guy in South Shields, well, I'll probably have to stop at least once getting home. And he looked at me and went, you'll have to stop more than once. You'll definitely have to stop more than once. But I was driving at this time, exactly this time last year, and it was raining, it was blowing a hoolie, it was freezing, and I just wasn't prepared for the degradation of range at all. So that came as a very sharp learning curve for me. Once you get your nap around that, though, absolutely great. Somebody said in last week's podcast that actually once you know exactly how the car's set up and set up to your favourite driving style, you know pretty accurately what miles you're going to get, and it is pretty accurate.
Yeah, I agree with that. Michael Fisher, what about your research before you purchased?
So a lot of them was from YouTube videos. Before I was going to get a Nissan Leaf or a Renault Zoe, but I couldn't get the cost to within my price range. And my Ford Fiesta was slowly dying. It's like, this is getting worse. And then I just heard winds of the MG coming around. Saw on James and Kate's YouTube channel, and also Mike Proctor's videos of the MG and how good they compared with the Nissan Leaf. And I went, it's within my price bracket. It can do roughly the range that I expect electric car of that price to do. Yeah, actually a little bit more, because I was expecting it to do just 100, not the 160. And we'll get into the exact figures in a moment. But for a car to be advertised at 22,000, 24,000, and to do 160 miles, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And then I just went into the dealership and said, how quickly can I get one? And they went, if you want blue, you can have it now. If you want any other color, you can't.
What about, I'll quickly cover my bit then, and then I'll come to Miles, because we can probably get the customer sort of view from him as well as his own. But yeah, I was the same. Maybe not as naive now I think about it, because now that you mentioned watching YouTube videos, Michael, that was the thing that I did a lot of. To my wife's chagrin, she was like, you know, it'd be Friday night, we'd had some wine, and I would watch another EV video of someone trying to do a certain distance. And there was, I can't remember the name of the channel, but it's not the one you mentioned, Michael, but there's this couple that, I can't remember.
Tesla
Beyond. They did a very long journey, didn't they, from a car show or something? And they got to somewhere in the middle of the night, and it was almost showing the real world example of it happening. But they loved the car, and that almost sold it to me, because I'd never thought of buying an EV before. But when I thought to myself, and I think it was Jules who said to me, do you know the average, she read somewhere that the average journey that the people who drive do is about 30 or 40 miles. That's the average journey. You know, you very rarely actually do long journeys unless your job dictates it. So this looked like it was going to be perfect for me. So I did research on YouTube, and that was it really. And on this forum, to be fair, I went on the forum before I ended up buying a car as well. So Miles, what about you? I mean, I don't know whether you can answer it from the customer side yourself as a customer, but do you get, how are you finding people when they come to you to look at buying a car? What do you say to them?
My first experience with electric cars and range was back when we had the Nissan Leaf 24 kilowatt hour. And that was advertised as having a range of 124 miles on NEDC. And in winter, with more than one person in the car with the heating on, you'd be lucky to get 65. And so that was a bit of a shock to most customers back then, and it was a shock to us as well. I think as well the fear being with the smaller batteries that it used to warn you when you had like 8 miles left, and when there were so few chargers around, it was often that you'd be, you know, it'd warn you you've got a low battery, you've got 8 miles left, but it was like 15 miles to the nearest charger, and you're stuck. As car batteries have improved and as cars have improved, as we'll talk about, we've gone from NEDC range to WLTP, which is more representative and more accurate, more achievable. And so I had the conversation today with a taxi company in Manchester who are looking at the MG5 to replace some Toyota Corolla estates that they currently run on taxis. And they're saying, you know, what's the real world range? Well, so it depends on obviously your load and how many people, you know, what speeds you're doing, etc. But if you're using them around city centre, if you're using them around Manchester, I think 200 miles is very achievable all year round, possibly more. In terms of motorway driving, if you guys are going to take it on the M6 and try and do 80, 90 miles an hour, it's going to have a massive impact on range, and they'll probably struggle to get around 150 in winter. But as to give the example, you know, I drove 190 miles down the A1 the other day to deliver an MG5 and still had a bit left. So if you know, depending on how they're willing to drive, or if they want to take a break, you know, on longer routes, they do contracts down for some airports to take people like cabin crew down to London and things. By law, they've got to stop after 2 hours anyway for half an hour. With the cabin, just as a cabin crew, as a passenger, need a break. So so that's their rule. So it fits in perfectly with charging. In fact, after 2 hours, even of high speed driving, they're not going to be low on charge unless they've done a lot of driving beforehand. So I think they're going to work really well for them. But yeah, in terms of what we speak to customers about, we say, you know, look, really, it depends on how you drive. It depends on what load you got. If you've got an MG ZS EV with a roof box and 5 people in, it's going to have worse range than if it's just one person and it's, you know, not using the heating and it's driving in summer. But this is why I think it's important that sales staff in dealerships ought to drive the cars themselves, and that's one thing I do. Make sure that I actually get real world experience myself in the cars, because I feel like there's no point. I can't sell somebody a car and talk with any authority on it if I don't understand it myself. If I've just watched the, you know, online training video from the manufacturer in 15 minutes and they've quoted WLTP range to me, that's all I'm going to know. That's all I'm going to believe. I won't have any real world experience. So it's important, I think, that sales staff do drive the cars and do learn how to do it. So for me, I've got tomorrow, actually, we've got a new Vauxhall franchise come on group with us. So tomorrow I'm taking the Vauxhall Corsa E for a few days and doing a video review of that. And again, it's just so that I can talk with a bit of conviction about what it'll actually do and compare things, because otherwise I'm as clueless as anybody else, you know, without actually trying it myself. What I will say is that I think that the WLTP mileage which MG claims for the cars is achievable in both cars, in both the MG5 and the MG ZS EV. I've actually beaten it. So the best I ever had in a MG ZS was 175 miles driven. And in the MG5, I got 227 miles. So both in summer, you know, but and both with, you know, just me in. But it is possible to get those sort of mileages. So again, I think that the WLTP is a lot more representative. I usually say knock off about 20% for winter. So if it says it can do 200 miles, I usually say it'll do about 160 in winter to be comfortable. And then knock off another 10 miles so that you're not coasting to the charger on 0. But no, I've been quite pleasantly surprised with both cars, really, that they do get the claimed mileage, even though the displayed miles per kilowatt hour figure isn't often as high as you see in other brands. Like the Nissan Leaf 62, I was driving it really, really carefully and I got 4.5 miles per kilowatt hour, but only just scratched 200 miles on it. But then the MG5, I was getting 3.9 miles per kilowatt hour and got 200 miles with bit to spare, and it's a smaller battery apparently. So I think that perhaps the way that it reports the miles per kilowatt hour figure is perhaps different to other brands, but for me it works. You know, you multiply that figure by the battery size and you get really what sort of mileage you're going to get out of it. So
we've taken I mean, when Julie uses it to commute, she I think I've posted on the forum before, she hammers it. There's no two ways about it. And when I drove it the other day and she was in the passenger seat, she was like, come on. But I just said, no, I'm going to take it easy. But the difference was, I remember, I think I posted it, as you say, and this was only 2 weeks ago, so the weather wasn't great. I drove it to Swansea, 25 miles, and I thought I'll try it because I'm not doing those sorts of miles because of lockdown. So I'm going to try it. I turned off the fan completely, heated seat, and I drove 25 miles, started on something like 207 miles on the clock. Yeah. That's what range it was giving me by turning off the heater, which that came as a surprise to me to start with. And I when I got there, it was 177 miles. And when I drove back the 25 miles, I went down from 177 to 144. And I reckon if I just kept driving like that, quite easily, I reckon I could have got 150, 170, maybe close to 190 miles because I was just taking it easy. Yeah. No rush, no hammering it onto the motorway, getting up to the speed, but I was just keeping an eye on the efficiency bar. Yeah, I was making sure that just, yeah, absolutely. And if you do that, you can do it. Now, the thing is, Jules says, I'm not driving like that. I'm going to drive how I drive. But the point is, because when she comes home, we just plug it in. And now we're on the new tariff. It's costing, I think the other night she had 15% left battery. I fully charged it overnight and it costs something like £1.96. So it doesn't matter if she hammers it because it's still as cheap as chips to run it as well. But she did have trouble. She only had 90 miles one day to get to work and back again. It's only a 50-mile range, but even she came back and drove along the back roads at 50 miles an hour because she was slightly nervous. But she got back with, I think, 15 miles on the clock. Proves it can be done if you need to and if you want to. So yeah. But
like even with the settings, you know, it's a trade-off of how quickly do you want to drive, how much comfort do you want to be in, etc. You know, that guy in India that's done, was it 500 kilometers? He had nothing on. You know, the guy sweating away. Yeah. Not sure if I'm prepared to do that.
No.
Really sweat in the car in the north of Scotland, I've got to tell you.
I'm only sweating because of range anxiety, not because of the weather. It's nothing like that. But that, I mean, that's interesting. So that's interesting about like what we thought we knew before we bought them. So moving on to what Miles just mentioned and the WLTP range, what it says compared to the EV database range, which I think is a really good sort of like resource that I know has been linked in the show notes. So it says, for the MG ZS EV real range, probably about 135 miles, depending on how you drive it. The MG5 real range, 175, depending on how you drive it. And it's a great resource if people don't know about it because it says what the city cold weather miles you'd get, what the highway cold weather you'd get, what the combined and all that. So it's a really good way of, I think, understanding what you might get from your vehicle. How I don't know whether you guys know your EV database figure for your particular cars. Would you say that's a true reflection, Stuart, in terms of cold weather highway 125 miles? Would you say it was worse or better?
I'd say that's about right, but it depends on the journey as well, doesn't it? Because obviously the faster you drive, you know, the more power it uses. I think that's probably, I'd say that's a pretty fair fair amount. I haven't seen that. I wasn't aware of that, so I'll have to look back because the only thing I went on was, I think I put as much trust in WLTP as I did MPG. If I was buying another car, to be perfectly honest, and just saw the 214 figure, and I was so keen to get into an EV that I thought, well, that'll do me, and you know, I was home and hosed. But clearly, there's no asterisk underneath it. And Miles mentioned about sales as well. You know, I think the sales staff, it's a little bit different at the moment, isn't it? Because we're not going into the showrooms to have a lengthy discussion and a lengthy sales pitch. But when I bought mine, it was in November and it was in between the two lockdowns. And it was pretty much roadside sales, and there was no mention at the dealership of, do you understand what you're getting into? And I think perhaps, you know, I've done sales in my career, and I think, oh, you probably as a salesman, you've got this bit, salesperson should say, this bit saying sell the car, this bit saying, you know, don't forget to tell them about the range. Sell it in the summer, probably a bit easier than selling it in the winter, I don't know. But I just think there's some dealers perhaps might skip over that and just assume that, you know. I don't know what your thoughts are there, Miles. Do you have people that are quite well informed, and I guess you've got those that don't have a clue? Like
Yeah, and to be fair as well, I think it's difficult sometimes when, I mean, it's easier for me because I only deal with electric cars.
Yeah.
Whereas in our showrooms, most of the sales staff will have to know about a range of vehicles. Our sites aren't just MG. We've got MG and Nissan in the same sort of building at Burnley, for example. And so the sales staff, if they get an inquiry about the MG ZS EV, the previous car they sold might have been an X-Trail diesel. The car before that might have been a micro petrol. And the car before that might have been some Mercedes that was a used car that was on the pitch. So it's often difficult for them to hold that knowledge in, you know, and retain it at such quick, you know, recall as we do, because, you know, we're just talking about select figures of cars. And I get it. So I mean, obviously now we've got so many franchises in our group. I say tomorrow I've got to do this, you know, comprehensive video review of a Vauxhall Corsa E, and I've got to be perfectly frank with it at the moment. I know nothing. I have not actually even opened a brochure about the car or anything. So I'm going to have to do some swatting tonight and tomorrow morning before I start this video, because otherwise I'm going to have absolutely no facts and figures to be able to put into the video, no knowledge whatsoever, because we only took the franchise on a week ago. So it's so yes, I think for sales staff it can be quite tricky, and particularly if they've come from, because again we tend to, well, we have previously, not so much in the last 12 months, but we have previously had often staff that have moved around different franchises. So you've got some staff, for example, that used to work at a Ford garage, and they've come to work, you know, they've come to work at MG, but they've never sold an MG car before in their life. And you know, week one they're onto the phone, and they're literally, all they've got to try and go for to answer the questions for people is to look at the brochures and see what the printed mileage is. So I do think there's a, you know, it's tough for the sales staff to know as much as everyone, because as you said, all of you said, YouTube and, you know, videos like this is such a wonderful resource for customers who are, you know, researching a car. And I'm the same. When I was looking for a car for my wife, we've ended up getting an MG ZS EV, but we were looking at all sorts of cars across all franchises, across, you know, outside of the franchise we sell as well. You know, just I saw a cheap contract hire deal on a smart EQ4, a smart 4.4 EQ or whatever. It was like £150 worth. I was like, oh, maybe that'd do for my wife, you know, just to do to from work, you know, short journeys and the rest of it. I went down to the showroom to have a look at one, and my first car when I passed my driving test was a Fiat Cinquecento, like in-betweener style. Yeah, it wasn't yellow with a red door, but it was that, you know, it was a 1993 L Reg. It was actually turquoise, and that car, I reckon, had a similar build quality to the smart EQ 4.4 that I sat in. It was very, very, very much like a polystyrene cup with wheels in terms of how it felt, you know, to sit in. You closed the door, and it didn't close the Mercedes thunk. It closed with a sort of baked bean camping thrown into recycling bin sort of noise. So yeah, so, but again, you know, I did a lot of research of all EVs, because as well, it's useful for me to know what the competition is. If we're selling, you know, the MG on its strengths, and somebody says to us, well, we've looked at your MG ZS EV, we're also considering a Nissan Leaf, we've also looked at the Kia Niro, we've also looked at this. Obviously, knowing the competitors is a really good way of being able to sell your own car. And, you know, having a conversation with people and say, look, you know, if you're comparing the Niro against the ZS EV, that's all well and good. The Niro is a good car, however, it doesn't have a full glass panoramic roof. The boot's a lot smaller, and it'll cost you about £10,000 more than a ZS EV. admittedly it will drive 100 miles more on range, but how often do you do those long, like Sean was saying, how often do you do those long journeys? Do you need to pay an extra £10,000 for a battery you're not going to be using 99% of the time?
Yeah.
And again, that's sort of, my logistics with the wife's car is like, well, we only need it to be good enough. We decided we've got the ZS EV because it'll do 2 to 3 days without a charge if needs be. As it happens, we charge it pretty much every night. But it means that if it does 2 to 3 days, then it doesn't matter if she forgets to plug it in one night, because we'll catch it the next one,
Yeah.
Whereas other cars with smaller range, it might be the case that, you have to charge it that night, every night. And if the charging timer doesn't work for some reason, or there's a power cut or whatever, then you're stuck. So for us, it was a case of just getting the one that does, twice the range we need, effectively, to give some comfort. Having the conversation with customers, making sure that they're aware of the pitfalls. I mean, obviously, back in the good old days, we could give you a test drive and let you drive the car yourself and see what your range is like. But that's why
I was lucky. I did my test. Thankfully, I was the same as you, Stuart. I was able to have a test drive, and that certainly told me when I did that. Yeah, it's not. You could see the mile is just ticking down. Because we wanted to try it out. We wanted to hammer it. We did. I think we did about 70 miles, and it really did come down, the numbers. But I was aware of that anyway, because I'd done the research by watching YouTube videos. Autoplanet was the video someone's mentioned in the chat. Thank you for that. Who did a really good review and just made it, it made it seem like it was a good practical solution. As you say, we're not doing these sorts of miles every week. We'll do it probably 2 or 3 times a year at the most. And we can decide to take the MG, or we can take the Subaru if we really want to. But I'd love to take the MG because I want to experience, I've only charged it once. And I only went to Monmouth, which is about 40 miles away. And I just wanted to charge it just to try charging it because I hadn't done it before. So I wouldn't mind doing a long road trip just to see how it is and to see that it does actually work. And I suspect it will work fine. So
it's amazing what Stuart says about how the salesman engages with you. The first car I looked at was the Kona. And I went into a local distributor and said, really interested in the Kona. Can you tell me anything about it? And he said, you're not going to get one for 14 months. That was it. End of. So.
Yeah. Shall we go to the chat and see if there's any questions just while we pause there? Michael, have you seen
yes. I'm going to the forum questions first. Will unaffected cars, that's sounds like the old the February 2020 cars, who's got the balancing at 455, will they be getting the new BMS at the next service, Miles? Is that a yes?
They should do, yes. Yeah, they should be getting the new software. Part of the servicing schedule is that we install the latest versions of updates as requested by MG. So if MG say there's a new version of BMS, we'd rather like you to put it on the cars, then it gets put on the cars.
Cool. And then the next one is when they're putting the car into reverse, sometimes it comes up as showing H3 battery failure or H3 battery shutdown. I have asked, is it during startup, and it sounds like it is. Could it be with it possibly rushing the procedure or halting the brakes?
I haven't seen that issue with any of our cars. I'd book it in at the dealer. I don't know how to describe that. If it says that warning on the screen, it should have logged a fault on the car. So if they take it into the dealer, they should be able to see any historical fault codes that have been generated and see what the issue is.
If it's happening a lot, then take it into
it's not something I've seen before, so I couldn't.
I've seen that once. Yeah,
I've had it where it's too quick. I haven't put the foot on the brake pedal, and then felt it go in. That's the only way I can describe it. Before I press the start button, and if I've just put my foot on the brake pedal quickly and not pushed it right in and press the start button straight away, that's come up. And I've had to turn it off and turn it on again.
No, so it says they leave the car to go to the shop. When they get back in, the ready light comes on. You put the car in reverse,
Might have rushed it, possibly.
Well, maybe it hasn't booted up in time, I guess. But no, it's not something like, if it's got the ready light on, it should work.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, no, this doesn't even go to the ready light.
Yeah,
As I say,
If it's got the ready light on, it should be working. So yeah, again, I just recommend them to book it in at the dealers and get it checked out, because it's not something that should be happening there.
Okay, cool. Just going to anything on the chat before we move on.
Any feedback on the the 5 roof rails? Any news, or is it still
nothing
TBC?
as yet? Nothing as yet. They're waiting for certification, I believe. I don't know if that's taking longer because of COVID, etc. It's usually an excuse for most things, isn't it? Or I don't know why, but no, you know, we have not heard any news recently on roof rails. I'll double check on the bulletin system. I haven't checked it the last couple of days.
Okay, I think that's it then for the chat at the moment, unless there's any more. So just moving on to how range varies according to various aspects. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but from my experience, clearly the external temperature, and it'll be interesting to actually drive the car in the summer just to open the sunroof as well, which would be nice. And see how, I'll be interesting if that affects the range actually, because if I don't have sorry, you don't have a sunroof, do you, Stuart? I can see you're shaking your head.
Well, at least it won't leak at the seals like somebody's mentioned there.
Oh no. I'd be interested to know if actually using the sunroof without anything else affects the range. Have you had any experience of that, Miles? Have you tried that? Have you had it all? Stuart, have you? Dave, did you have it in the summer months and were able to drive with the roof open? Or
oh yeah,
I was driving the roof open last week, I'll have you know.
Yeah, we did.
Scotland.
Yeah, well, when it was sunny, was it last? Was it not Mother's Day? What was it? What day was it? It was the other. It was Saturday, Sunday before, wasn't it? And it was sunny weather. It was like 14 degrees or something crazy, which is, you know, that's our August, isn't it? So Yorkshire. So it was. We had the roof open on the ZS when we picked it up, and it was. Yeah, wife drove back with the roof open all the time. It was lovely. I was in the 5, so I couldn't do that.
Do you know if it does affect the range, anybody then? Because that would be a really good thing to do in the summer without putting anything on, just having the sunroof open.
Generally, the rule that I was always taught with petrol cars, and I'm not sure if it's the same with EVs, is up to 30 miles an hour, it's more efficient than air conditioning to have the windows down on the car. Don't know about the sunroof, but into the door windows down. Above 30 miles an hour, they cause too much drag, so you're better having the aircon on. With the sunroof, it's got that sort of wind deflector built in. So, but again, it does tend to get a bit loud on the motorway. So it's more something I'd use for driving around town, or perhaps up to sort of 40, 50 miles an hour. I wouldn't take it on the motorway, I don't think, with the roof open, just for noise reasons.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. That's a good point. I'm just going to come back, if I can. I've just been prompted, which is a good prompt, about talking about WLTP versus the EPA federal test procedure, the US Environmental Protection Agency test procedure. Do you know anything about that, Miles? Is that something you can speak to? Does it ring a bell? It's not something
I know that the EPA have their own test procedure. I don't know the difference between that and WLTP. I'll be honest. It's generally seen that the US EPA test is more stringent and more harsh on vehicles than the WLTP. To give you an example, the EPA, when I said, you know, the NEDC range on the Leaf 24 was 124 miles. The real world was around 65, and the EPA, I think, was 67. So EPA called it pretty much accurately, and NEDC was, you know, not even worth talking about really in terms of accuracy. The NEDC, the new European drive cycle, was used from the 1970s through till 2016, I think it was. And it was basically that they would drive a very it was based in a laboratory. It was a very short test cycle where they basically accelerated very gradually up for a set number of seconds to get to about 30 miles an hour, and then they slowed back down again, and then that was the urban route. And then they did the extra urban where they accelerated up to about 50 miles an hour and then slowed down again. which obviously is not representative compared to people driving at 90 miles an hour in the fast lane on the motorway,
No.
or people doing stop-start driving around London where the engine's idling for long periods of time. And that's why, you know, NEDC was used for all petrol and diesel and everything cars. And it was a way of comparing range, or comparing miles, fuel efficiency, but it was not at all representative. And in terms of real world emissions, which obviously Dieselgate from VW, you know, exposed to the world as how far away from reality these things were. They then prompted them to switch over to the WLTP test, which is the Worldwide Light Vehicle Test Program, where they do a very varied route. It lasts a lot longer, does the actual test, and then they also, on the back of that, with petrol and diesel cars, do an RDE test, which is a real driving emissions test, where they've basically got a probe up the exhaust pipe of the car and stuff in the boot, and they drive it on roads, and it's got to get within a certain percentage of what it did in the lab, to actually qualify. So that's to try and get rid of the gamification of emissions rules that, you know, some German manufacturers managed to do. Having said that, with electric cars, obviously the RDE test is kind of by the by because there's no emissions at all. They don't really bother with the RDE test in EVs, but in WLTP is more representative. It's got more harsh acceleration and harsh braking. It's got some idling times. One of the things that obviously hybrids and everything came about because it was another way to game the emissions test, that you could, if the engine wasn't running, obviously it wasn't creating any emissions. Well, on that period of the NEDC test where it was stationary for 20 seconds before they then set off again, the engine just switched off. There was no engine running at all. So the overall emissions looked great. You know, so we had the Prius used to be rated at something like 70 grams of CO2 per kilometre on an EDC, when in real world it was closer to 100, because it was very rare once you got above 28 miles an hour, it'd actually be running the engine all the time. So that's the sort of thing that the testing procedures have changed to be more accurate. I think WLTP is close. It's a good way of comparing different cars. There are still some that get much better WLTP figures than perhaps people manage in the real world. MG, I think, seems to do pretty much bang on its WLTP, give or take maybe 5%. Some manufacturers are way different to what they claim on what they do get on WLTP. As Nissan Leaf, for one, I'd really struggled to get 200 miles out of a Nissan Leaf 62 kilowatt hour driving like a vicar, whereas you know, the MG5, I mean, today I drove on the motorway today to Manchester and back and did, I think I did 90 miles and used 50% of the battery. So that'd be 180 miles total range, which I think for motorway driving, when it was 4 or 5 degrees outside and it was raining, I think it was pretty good going really for sort of 70 miles an hour on cruise.
I think the problem with all these tests, it's based on driving style as well, isn't it? That's the problem. We all drive differently. And even with petrol or diesel cars, some of the figures, I think Jules was supposed to do in a Subaru 46 miles per gallon, and she's never got above 29. You know, so I think the problem is sometimes it's a great thing to shout about with EVs because they're relatively new, isn't it? And but actually, if you think about those figures that you always saw when you were buying your petrol or diesel car, I don't think they ever made that much sense unless you drove it in a certain way, and not everybody does. And if you don't, you just accept that you get less, or if you drive it in a certain way, you'll get more. So it's a funny one, and I can see why they've got to advertise something. But as you say, I think with certainly my experience with the ZS EV, I've got very close to the 163 or whatever it is, and I suspect I would do even more in the summer, just because of the way I decided that I'm just 46 now, so that's how I'm going to drive, like a vicar, as you say. So it's I just think the problem with at the moment not being able to test drive cars may be the issue. At least at the moment, I can, you know, when I bought mine, I could test drive it, and I knew then, I thought, okay, this isn't going to do those sorts of mileage potentially if I'm going to actually put my right foot down and hammer it. But yeah, it's a balance between getting there in, you know, with in 20 or 30 minutes as opposed to getting there in 40 minutes, which is the way I look at it. And I'd rather get there in 40 minutes and save a bit of money because that's me.
As you're talking about efficiency, Sean, on the last part of the efficiency meter, in yellow is boost. What's boosting what? Because if you get that far round, you're getting about no miles to the kilowatt hour. So
It reminds me of Knight Rider. Also
Speed.
boost. It means
You're
that
boosting your
almost-
speed.
I thought it was supposed to be Scottish for bust. Oh, you've
Well, there we go. It's always there.
Let me just say that I think yellow is Julie's favourite colour, and we'll leave it there, shall we? She thinks you have to get there. That's the problem.
It's a target, yeah.
Yes. But I mean, that was a funny thing. I drove it the other day just for the fun of it, just to try it in sport mode, which I don't think I'd ever done before. Funny enough, bloody hell! I actually, Julie was sat there and she was thrown back in a chair.
Is the ZS is it front wheel drive? Yeah. So this is that with I've put the 5 when I've got enough range left on a journey. We have a dual carriageway, and it's pretty much from a standing start. So sometimes you'll get somebody next to you in the 3 Series or whatever, and you just sort of just put it into sport because I know that I've got 18% left, so I can get home on that. And then put it in sport, floor it, and then you just sort of leave the BMW driver looking at what's going on. Obviously not at my smoke coming out of the exhaust pipe, but it's the tires as well. It's amazing the wheel spin you can get out of it. But it's almost like when I do this regular 90 miles there, 90 miles back trip for work, and on certain days of the week, and you're driving like this, like said Vicar at 70, watching all the cars going past. But then you're almost like you've got your harness off when you know you've got enough to get home, and you can rag it a bit and you can have some fun on it. So that's the reward, isn't it?
Absolutely. No, I agree.
Can I just say, none of us condone wheel spins, by the way.
all of them are accidental, and I wouldn't. To be perfectly honest as well, I would never ever think about going from the lights with sport mode if the road was wet.
Yeah, no, that'd be interesting, wouldn't it?
Feel the car.
I mean, the thing is that with the ZS and the 5 as well, they've got like 260 foot-pound of torque, which is sort of in the realms of sort of like what you'd use to have in a 3.5 litre V6. So that's why we get wheel spin, because we've got little eco tyres. They're quite pro. And you're putting all that through the front wheels, which is, again, is going to break traction because the weight will transfer backwards as you accelerate. So yes, that's why you get a bit of wheel spin.
There's no engine weighing down on those front wheels, is there?
Yeah, and so it is great traction. That's why I tend to drive in eco mode most of the time, because I find that otherwise I get I look like a hoodlum, because I'll set up in a junction just trying to get out swiftly, and the front wheel will light up and just like this, I was like, oh Christ, everyone's staring at me. There's no noise coming from the engine, but there's the tires going.
Yeah.
Stuart, you must have been at risk of being struck by your fluffy dice with that acceleration.
No, I'd take them out. Yeah, I used to have them, but no, they're in another car now. Yeah, far too middle-aged for me now. You see, that's what it is.
Your car, of course, it doesn't the MG5. I think it's 0 to 60. Isn't it like almost a second quicker than the ZS EV?
Half a second quicker. It's 7.7 versus 8.2.
Yeah. So
the difference with the 5 is it's got a much higher top speed. It's 115 versus 87.
But also, when you've got it on the, I don't know if you have that A thing, like a parking brake, semi-parking brake in the ZS.
Oh, the automatic hold.
Yeah, auto hold.
Yeah. So I used to have that in the Mercedes on the hold. You just shove your foot on the brake pedal. This is a lot easier because you get to 0 and the little green light comes on, and then for me, that is in launch control.
Yes.
So all you do is just wait for the light just to flick off of amber, and then floor it, and it's like there's no stalling, there's no changing gear involved. So I think you save half a second on that BMW that's in your rear view mirror, just because the car does it for you, unless it's wet and you're going sideways with the front wheels. But
does anybody use the automatic brake?
The what?
The automatic brake. Does anybody use that?
In what sense, Sean?
Because it just seems to be a bit of a delay So you know the automatic handbrake, if you put
Right.
that on and if you use that while you're driving around town, it's absolutely fine. And it will come on automatically when you put your foot on the brake and you
That's
come to a
the A.
standstill.
That's the A.
But there's a
button.
slight delay, isn't there, I think,
Hmm.
when you pull away. So that's
Yeah,
what we
you're
do.
almost
Yeah.
doing that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And there-
actually, it's not as bad on the 5 actually. On the MG ZS, and actually, I think they improved this Sean with the later software update. To be fair, I think on the ZS, on the original ZS, it was like a half second to almost a second pause when you put your foot on the accelerator before it released the parking brake, and so it gave you a bit of a short, you know, a bit of a non-smooth transition. The MG5 is a lot smoother than that. I was actually playing with the auto hold today, actually around Manchester, and just trying different things to see, it's different scenarios and how well it held and things. And yeah, no, I think it is a little bit smoother in the 5. But I do think from driving my wife's ZS this last week, I think it is better probably than it was in the original ZS.
Okay.
I think there's been a software update since, so probably next time we have a service, there'll be change.
Improve it. It's not horrendous. It's just, when you sort of think, no, because I want to pull away at the lights, I'm just going to turn it off, and just to get the Audi driver alongside.
Yeah. I had a problem with I had a Qashqai as a car for a couple of days because I lent my MG5 out to someone, and the Qashqai was a stop-start auto petrol with auto hold. So obviously you come to a junction, you put your foot on the brake, it comes on auto hold, engine cuts out, you take your foot off the brake, the engine restarts, but then it holds it on the brake, but then you put your foot on the accelerator, and it used to really sort of jolt as it came away from the thing, because it was really sort of holding it, and then obviously you had to overcome the torque with the engine to be able to get it to go. You'd rev it a bit to actually set off.
Yeah.
Really, made the ZS EV look like a Rolls Royce.
Yeah. What about looking at sort of like how range varies then according to different things that we use, or external factors? So clearly external temperatures there. I use regen a lot. I don't know about you guys. I use it's always in 3. I just leave it in 3. I know that is the default setting, but I just leave it in 3 because
I've converted to that now. Yeah.
You get used to it a lot, don't you? I found, especially coming up to, I know it's not one pedal driving as it's called, but it's very, unless you've got a full battery, and obviously there isn't much regen going on there. But when you've used 20% of the battery, I almost never use the actual foot brake because it's not required. The way I drive, I'm just sort of judging junctions coming up and that sort of thing, and that really does help. I've seen the mileage tick up, which is really good when I use the regen, so that's always useful. What other factors are there that you might engage to improve the range yourselves? Have you tried?
What always goes against me living in Inverness, if I'm going south, you've just got to climb up a mountain. You drive through the Cairngorms, and that's just a killer. I can just see myself going up the hill immediately. And I was charging up at a charge point near Dunfermline a couple of weeks ago, but a couple of months ago. And this guy came up with a VW, and he said he'd run out coming out of Inverness because he thought he'd plenty of miles to get to Matton, but because it is all uphill, it just wiped him out. So I've noticed that gradient does really bite up the miles.
Yeah. And I suppose it's also about like we've mentioned previously, is keeping an eye on the efficiency bar. And you can pull away onto the motorway and go way past that. But as long as you can get the speed up to whatever speed you want, but in a slightly slower manner, if you want to really watch the range, I think that really does help. I think it's a really good way of getting as many miles out of the battery as possible. But again, because if you've got a home charger, it's something we don't really care about, So yeah, we've got driving styles. I suspect driving at 70 miles an hour is not great.
Not too bad in the
71.
Yeah.
I find if I just stick it at 70, it is a complete change around a driving style. Let's be honest, most people are quite happy traveling at 80 miles per hour on a motorway. And I would have been one of those drivers, if you like, before, but now it is the 70 miles per hour thing because I want to save range. And I've actually worked out as well, and it took a little while. Hang on a moment. If I'm stopping for 20 minutes to put 30 miles charge on, why don't I just drop my MPH and I'll get there in less time just because I haven't stopped for 20 minutes.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah,
So-
no, I think the tortoise and hare is very much a thing I use when I'm
Yeah, you
doing
did.
like long
Yeah.
deliveries and things. So I drove, as I drove, when I drove down to Cambridge, down to Ely, it was 190 miles there in 5, and I did it without stopping by driving at like 65 on the A1, which actually, because the A1 is that little bit narrower and a bit more twisty than the motorways, is it feels right. You know, if it doesn't feel too slow really. And I say, but if I'd done 70, I'd have had to find a charger.
Yeah.
You know, probably, you know, with 10, 15 miles together, I'd have had another 15, 20 minutes onto the journey. Plus, it'd have cost me a bit of money on my Yorkshireman. So it was, in total, just for the sake, I think tortoise and hare. You know, if you think of just take your time and get there, with less charge stops. You know, it's like if I did 80 miles an hour in the 5, I think my range would probably be down to around 100. Well, I think at 80 miles an hour, probably down to about 130 miles, probably.
Also, the risk of having a fine as well. And points.
Yeah, which obviously, you know, my job where we need to be able to drive all the time, it's not ideal.
Yeah, mine's the same. And you know, I got stopped on a dual carriageway for doing 79 on a 70 miles per hour on the A43. You know, and that's the whole kind of mythical 10% plus 3 or whatever. What a load of rubbish. So I got done for doing 79 on a camera, which is binary, isn't it? You either are speeding or you're not. And since that day, I started to slow down, but again, crept up to that, you know, going over the 70 miles per hour. Now I just stick it on cruise control, and I know I haven't got the adaptive like you in the ZS, but still knock it off. It brakes when I need it to, and then it just seems to be the easiest and most definite cruise control. It's so much easier than the Merc that was on a lever. This one, just press the button, it stays in standby mode. Press the button and it engages as soon as you get to the speed. It's nothing to fault at all.
I do like the cruise control. I know you don't have the adaptive, but that's something I'm so amazed with when I looked at this car and the spec, and it said it had adaptive cruise control, and I thought, what, really? And when I tried it out, because I did try that on the test drive, and it was fantastic. You know, I know there's an element of me still thinking, is it going to slow down? Please slow down. But it does, and actually it does it really well. And I think I said before we started the podcast, I tried it the other day with the lane assist as well, and you could almost, it won't let you, but you could almost take your hands off the steering wheel and take your feet off the pedals. It's that good, actually. I'm really, really impressed with it on this vehicle that costs this amount of money. Really impressed. I don't know how that affects driving efficiencies, though. I do wonder with adaptive cruise control whether that's a good or a bad thing. I don't know.
So
I haven't
that's
really
actually
figured
an
it out yet.
important point to make, actually. On the MG5, it doesn't have adaptive cruise, but if, say, you're going down a hill and your cruise is set to 70 and the hill is such that the car would normally try to gain speed, it will start to use regenerative braking to slow you down. On the MG ZS EV, if you have it on adaptive cruise and the car tries to slow, it actually doesn't regen, it just uses friction brakes, which is a really strange thing. And I've asked MG if it's possible to change it, and they say it's not with the kit with the package they bought from Bosch, because the MG Pilot system is a Bosch product that's just been rebadged.
Okay.
They couldn't do that option with using the regen to slow it down on the adaptive cruise, which is a shame, because I say it does do it on the MG5 on the overspeed sort of thing. So it can affect your range in a little, you know, it won't regen as much as it would do if you were driving manually and you were lifting your foot off to slow down rather than. So what I tend to do in the ZS, if I'm driving long distances, I'll put it on the adaptive cruise, but then I've always got my eyes ahead, and I'll possibly knock the regen down to 1 when I'm on the motorway, so it doesn't just anchor on as soon as I lift off, as soon as I cancel the cruise control. But I'll cancel the cruise control to slow up to a car coming in, you know, and then if I think it needs slowing down a bit faster, I'll knock it into regen 2, regen 3, maybe back to 1 then if it starts to slow down too much, you know. Then so I'm sort of like flicking with the buttons inside, like as if I'm doing anything useful, I guess, but it was sort of driving with my fingers rather than my feet in some ways.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so that's the difference between the two cars. In some ways, the MG5 can be more efficient on longer journeys because of
it hasn't got a sunroof though, has it?
it hasn't.
got-
If you saw the pre-production car that I did, which had a sunroof, and you may have seen this if you look at the Wltp i5 from China.
Hmm.
The sunroof is basically about the size of my mobile phone, and
Okay.
behind the driver. Sort of, it's a really small cassette type sunroof. And
Right.
when we were having the conversation with MG as to when they were talking about specs and bringing it across from China, for the amount of cost it would have added and the potential. It's a potential water ingress as well, isn't it? If seals go wrong in a few years, whatever.
Yeah.
We just thought it wasn't really worth it because it added quite a lot of weight and cost to the car and didn't really add any functionality. It wasn't like the big, panoramic roof that you have in the ZS, which I do love. That's one thing I really like about the wife's MG ZS is that it's got that big glass roof, and so she really likes that as well. She likes posing with the sunglasses on and roof open. So.
Stuart, one of our greatest joys in driving the ZS is being able to open the sunroof and touch to the load that's on our roof bars.
I was waiting for that. I was thinking of something to say, like, well, at least I don't have to look at my load on my roof bars, but I don't have to look through the roof. But then there won't be a top box on there anyway, would there?
No.
So, yeah, absolutely not. But no.
At your own risk, I think.
Yeah.
What do people think about? I've seen it mentioned a few times on the forum about slipstreaming. It's not something I've ever done. Not something. Not something I've ever done personally. But I've seen there are two sides to it. One saying, yeah, it's great for maximizing efficiency, but then others saying actually it can be extremely dangerous. What's the feeling in the virtual room?
So what I do, because I won't say I do slipstreaming, because slipstreaming, in order to slipstream effectively, you basically ought to be almost touching the car in front.
Right.
And we definitely don't condone that.
No, but what I do with the MG Pilot, if I'm doing a long journey, I usually find a quick truck. So the ones that they're supposed to be limited to 56. This is the one that's driving at 60-ish. Lock onto the back of him on the adaptive cruise, because he's going to keep me at 60 rather than if I'm driving myself, I'm going to get bored. I'm going to go up to 70, 75. Then I'm going to realize I was naughty. I need to go back down to 65. I'm going to get, so if I find a quick truck, or the best thing usually, or it was back in the day when people took coach holidays, was a coach, because coaches travel at 70 miles an hour. Yep. And the big and they block a lot of air out of the way, but they don't hang around. So they do sort of move around the lanes a bit. So if you can set on the motorway behind a National Express, doing sort of 65, 70, then you're going to sort of get the aerodynamic benefit of him pushing the air out of the way, and also your passengers can log into their Wi-Fi as well. So.
Yeah, I was just about to say that if you do find National Express, you can use the Wi-Fi, but Megabus unfortunately not. But you do look at Davo Green on your journey.
On the back of it, yeah. With his neck. Yeah, it's not something I've ever done, but maybe because I haven't had the car long enough to try it. But I think I do enjoy using adaptive cruise control. It is a really great system. Very impressed. And actually, as I say, it just makes the driving really easy. For what people have called a brick, it's a really pleasant drive. I really enjoy driving.
I just say as well, only a full brakes 2-second rule.
Yeah.
If
also, with when the roads are gritted, of course, bigger lorries are going to kick them up, and it's going to just damage your paintwork.
Yeah,
so
that's what I read on the forum. People want about the window breaking or whatever, that sort of thing. Have we got anything in the chat that we haven't covered yet?
Yes. Dave Anderson is thinking of going to Italy with his ZS. I did read just before, well, no, actually, last summer, someone in the Facebook group done a similar journey. So you may want to have a look. I think he put up a PDF of all the charge spots as well he used on his trip. So for Dave Anderson, maybe have a quick look at Facebook. I'm not quite sure if he's on the forums and whether he posted it on there, but hopefully he has. If not, go on to Facebook. And yeah, don't take your ham sandwiches because they won't get through customs.
I was going to say about that as well. You could do, I was thinking about, you know, like you do these car rallies, but we wouldn't do that with EVs, would we? Because we'd all be squabbling for the charging stations
That
and
would be a
everything.
nightmare.
You know, it's not like filling into a gas station and filling up one after the other. We're kind of like, well, gotta get so.
That's what concerned me about, you know, Fully Charged Live when it was in Silverstone, and there was something like 5,000 EV owners descended on Silverstone, and it was like if everyone is coming in the same direction, same routes, they're all going to get to roughly the same charge at the same time. Yeah. It's an absolute carnage.
Yeah. Well, there's a few Scottish drivers all want to get together at some stage once Nicola allows us to do that. And that was one of my queries. We're all going to be fighting over the same charger. So.
What you could do is rally rules where you'll have like a half-hour intervals and you set off, wait half an hour, set off, and so on. And then if you meet up with the other person, they've either broken down or you've been speeding.
Yeah, that's a good point. Someone's just, Peter Ebenezer has just come on the chat saying he's just joined. Have we talked about the hidden coast feature of the assisted cruise control yet? What does that mean?
We haven't talked about it, but yeah, that is something that's possible to do on the MG ZS EV. So on the ZS EV, if you set the adaptive cruise speed to something like 30 miles an hour, but then you override it to 70 or 60, whatever, by driving it with your foot. When you come off with your accelerator, it'll actually go to freewheel rather than actually actively braking you, unless there's somebody in front of you.
Right.
So let's say say you're going down a hill or whatever, or you're going on the flat. You can do a sort of like a pulse and then lift off, rather than keeping it at a constant speed. And it's yes, it's sort of it's strange because it gives no regen whatsoever. It's almost like being in neutral.
Okay.
But it means that the car effectively sort of sails for a bit.
So you're saving battery.
I haven't done it for a while, to be fair, but I did do it on a few longer journeys, and after somebody mentioned it and tried it, and it does seem to give you better efficiency in a way, because you're not when you're doing regenerative braking, it's not efficient 100%. You know, you're going to lose a bit in the transfer of energy back, and so when you use that power again, you've lost 20%. Whereas if you just use it as in a neutral format, then it means that, I say it still does do the regen braking. So if you the adaptive cruise, so if you come behind somebody and you lift your foot off the accelerator, it'll roll up into the point where the radar picks it up, and then it'll start to brake as it brings you up towards them. So it does still keep the safety aspect there.
Okay. Well, he's just said, actually, fantastic hidden feature for hilly Wales on the M4. And as someone who lives along the M4, and yourself, Michael, I think I need to try that. Definitely.
Yeah, especially going from one side of Newport to the other, because the M4 is just notoriously hilly in just that section.
Well, it's funny that Julie, driving to work from Bridgend to just outside Cardiff, does less miles than when she comes back. I'm assuming because of maybe the hills on the way back. I don't know. Interesting. Have we got anything else that we can talk about regarding range then? Because I've just noticed it is 8:33, so I'm looking at wrapping up. Anything else in the chat before we go? I don't think there is. I've had a quick look.
We've answered that one. Answered that.
A lot of people saying they really like the adaptive cruise control, so sorry about that, Stuart. But
we love
it. Always good to read.
I'm used to it now. Doesn't
and
matter.
The sunroof.
Yeah.
But you got the range.
I can do the range and the regen. So
there you are. You know, what can we say? What can we say? Well, if that's it, if I can go to my notes, just to say that if there's any MG owners with some miles under your belts, and I know that's quite difficult to do at the moment, but if you have got some experience driving your MGs and we'd like to come and share your experience on the podcast, please do get in touch. It's always good to have some variety on these things. But for now, that's it for the MG EVs podcast this week. My thanks in no particular order to Michael Fisher.
Thank you. Good night.
David Stewart.
Good night, everybody.
Stuart Whitman.
See you next time.
And from Chorley Group, Miles Roberts.
Bye, and happy International Women's Day to both of our female listeners.
And thank you to the unseen Stuart Wright, who works feverishly in the background, ensuring that all this happens smoothly. Thanks for that, Stuart. We'll be back next Monday, 15th of March, at the usual time of 7:30 p.m. So we look forward to seeing you then. Cheers.